schools. The children, yeah,
Oh,
the children.
Junior high students?
Yeah, you're right.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. Every time I say that to somebody.
The most challenging.
But this man understands. So I enjoyed those experiences. And then I finished my career in central office. I was in charge of human resources when I retired. So I had a wealth of experiences and opportunities, actually nationwide with conferences and all, to talk with others and begin to really build a sound foundation, if you can, for education, and particularly for children of color and for low-income children. So after I retired, after a couple of years trying to get myself together, after those 37 years, I became a member of the local NAACP, which is called the Greater Indianapolis National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And yes, we still use the word color, but it's used to define we're all people of various colors. So that's the context today, because we're always asked that. Mm-hmm. And I co-chair the education committee with a gentleman who is he's probably 87 by now, who had a long-term background. His name is Larry Barkley in higher ed. And he wanted me to be the chair, and I said, no, what I'll do, I'll be your partner. So we want to keep and honor you and your experiences, so that's why I'm a co-chair. So we work together for our issues. And I want to start out by saying, when I'm talking today, I'll be talking from the NAACP position, which I will state when I do that. And then there are times when I'm talking Carol Craig,
oh, sure,
my own opinion, and I'm also an education consultant. And so I do work specifically on culture responsiveness, which is education and teaching that is integrated with a response to a culture of the children. It's similar to diversity that you have in business and industry. So that's kind of my forte. So do you want me to talk more about myself, or you want to?
I think we can. That gives us a very good background in your organization, and Kevin, I'd like to hear from him on the same basis.
Yes, and let me again echo what Carol said here. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here, because there are a lot of misconceptions, and you need some in-depth discourse about these topics. So glad to be here, and we had a chance to chat a little bit before we got here, and found out how much we had in common along the way. I'm a long-term educator as well, public school educator, 31 years as a matter of fact. The first 21 of those were with what we will probably call here traditional public schools. I got out of college, took my first position with Carmel Clay Schools in 1981 as a teacher and a coach.
What did you coach?
What did I coach? I coached wrestling, baseball, football. I coached about everything.
Wow, just like my husband. Yeah, coach them all.
Yeah, great experience, and great fun working at that level with those kids. I did decide to move into administration, became an assistant principal at Carmel Clay Schools at Carmel Junior High. Did that for several years. I decided.
Okay, so you're assistant principal in a junior high. That's kind of like a double.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, I love my assistant principals.
So you're going to do all the discipline.
That tends to be the case. Yes, you're right.
You're going to be the bad guy.
Yeah, in some ways. So, yes, I didn't want to stall my career there. So I did have a wonderful opportunity. Worked 4 years as the principal at Speedway Junior High School. And as I was telling Carol, what a nice educational experience to move, and it really affected me in my charter school life. Having been involved with a very large junior high school. And at that point, we were pressing about 1,300 students at junior high level at Carmel. Moved to Speedway, we had 235. So really got to see the opportunity that we educators were talking about as far as what you can do with small school communities and that kind of thing. So it was a great experience for me. I did return to Carmel Clay Schools in 1998 and 99, and I started getting involved with a very interesting educational idea that they had to begin a alternative school. The community had been in a very thorough, broad-based study and had determined in the 1990s that Carmel Clay Schools was doing a fantastic job with the number of merit scholars and their upper level students. However, that study showed that there was some weakness in what they were doing with some of the students who were struggling. Give Steve Teagarden some credit at that point. He was superintendent at Carmel Clay Schools, and he wanted to do something for those kids, as did the whole community and the school board. So I kind of changed my focus from traditional education into alternative education, and we began building a system of an alternative school within Carmel Clay. So that was called the Matrix School at that point, that we hoped would become even a county-wide co-op for students who were struggling. Along the way, in 2001, the charter school law passed in Indiana. And for various reasons, we moved that effort from a part of the traditional public school system, and we applied to become a charter school, one of the first charter schools to open in the state in 2002-2003, which the Carmel Clay School Board adopted. So then, as my transition to the charter school world, I co-founded, along with Barb Machino, that charter school, and began developing those alternative school programs that we had the vision of developing as a traditional public school administration team. I think we did a great job of that. In 2006, we founded a second school in Noblesville, Options Charter School in Noblesville, which was actually a replication of the Options Charter School in Carmel, just so we could keep that small school concept and serve those students that were wanting to come to the Carmel school but were a little farther away. And then it was time, in any organization like that, you have a point when it is, you're going to have to pass it on. You want your schools to continue on. I had a great leader that was ready to assume my role, and I knew that I could find something else out there that would excite me in education. So I resigned at the end of this school year, or last school year, and lo and behold, and knew Russ Simnick for a long time, but the Indiana Public Charter School Association has really been active in the state since about 2008, and talked with Russ about some of the exciting visions and some of the...
Russ Simnick is?
Russ Simnick is the president of the Indiana Public Charter School Association. Has some great visions for our association becoming not only an advocacy organization, but a supportive organization to provide a lot of services to assist schools and assistant charter school quality. And that's the key throughout, that charter schools that exist here in Indiana, we want to be quality schools. And I thought, hey, if I can do anything to help that, I want to be a part of it.
And you're vice president?
Yes, so I took that position about a month ago, so I'm still learning. But.
Well, and Kevin, starting with you then, and then we'll come back to Carol. What is a charter school generally, and specifically, I know that there are differences between different states and the District of Columbia in the manner in which they've adopted charter school programs or statutes. Give us a general sense and then get more specific to Indiana.
Sure. I don't want people to forget the roots of where these things come from.
This is Indiana. It's roots. It's
roots.
Roots.
It's roots. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
Oh, okay.
I'm from Southern Indiana. I would definitely agree with that.
The roots. All right. Back in 1983, A Nation at Risk was published, and that was a result of a commission that President Reagan put together. And it came out with some really hard language that people will remember about, we're drowning in a sea of mediocrity. And that hard language started a lot of public discourse about the state of education in our country. And it's not that it hadn't been discussed previously, but that was at the time there was some real hard dialogue. And, through those next few years, a lot of educators started saying, we're having so many burdens and regulations and policies put upon us that if we were just freed from some of those, we could do a better job. Please don't respond to this mediocrity message by giving us more rules and regulations that we have to follow. Now, some people kind of took that philosophy in different ways, but finally in 1992, in the state of Minnesota, they came up with a charter school system which basically said, okay, we're going to take that premise, and we're going to free you from some of the traditional rules and regulations, just like you've been calling for. But on the other end of that, we're going to make you highly accountable. In other words, the ultimate of that is you tell us what you're going to be able to do and what you're going to be able to accomplish to create a quality school. And we're going to be reasonable in letting you have a period of time to do that. You need to show us that you've done that. And as a matter of fact, if you don't show us that you've done that, your school is subject to being shut down.
Okay, so charter schools have a sponsor. And who in Indiana can sponsor charter schools?
In Indiana, any school board can sponsor charter schools.
But they rarely do, correct?
There are a few, and I gave you an example earlier where Carmel Clay Schools did that. West Lafayette School Board has Beacon Charter School, and also Evansville School Board and Signature School. And I believe I've hit all of them there. I apologize if I've left any out. But a school board can, the mayor of Indianapolis, and a college or university can. And right now, Ball State is one of the leading authorizers in the state, and I believe they have 49 schools.
And your association represents some, maybe a majority, but not all charter schools in Indiana.
Well, we are a member organization, so there are certain services that we provide exclusively for the members. But on the advocacy end of things, yes, we do work with making sure that the integrity of that concept of charter schools is kept alive and well.
So,
for all.
And I'll direct this to Carol. We were talking before we went on the air that the charter schools are public schools.
Yes.
How would you distinguish charter schools from, and Kevin had used the expression earlier, traditional public schools? How is it that is there the distinction there, what their role is?
I think what we have is we have things that are very fuzzy, and there is no clear line. But I also want to say, when we're talking about any issue that has to do with education, it's not simplistic. It's very complex, extremely complex. I think Kevin would agree with that.
Absolutely.
So when we're talking about issues or institutions, when we say charter schools, I don't think it can be pure. And what's happened is the line has gotten real fuzzy.
But you're a science teacher, and
yes.
let's get right down to it. I mean, we're like creationism would make everything so simple if we just accepted that in science.
But the reality is, when we're talking about human beings, and specifically when we're talking about organizations, which are living organisms, it's very, very complex. And we have other motives that slip in. We have unintended consequences, and then we have those that have been a part of the perpetuation of the haves and the have-nots in this country. And we have to admit that we have those issues in the country. When education first began, when the public schools first began, we all know that there was a movement for democracy and that everyone would become democratic citizens. But once public schools got going, we know that the aim was to educate those who would go off to be the scholars to the universities, and those that did not would go off into the factories. That's the reality of what happened in Indiana as we go through that same kind of history. So when we go through that, we know that all through this time, there were those who were not as well educated as others. And those happened to be those from lower income and those of color. As our population increased with students of color, we're talking about Hispanics as well as African Americans. So when we talk about charter schools, if we look at after the Brown versus Board decision, there was some intention to start little schools on the side to prevent students from sitting next to students of color in traditional schools. So there were some of those that ended up on the side like little private schools. When we look at where we are today, and we're talking about charter schools, and I want to be clear that the National Association for Advancement of Colored People does not come out and say they are against charter schools. What we're saying now is we are asking for kind of a limitation on the expansion, a kind of a moratorium until things are more examined. So the charter schools we recognize in, particularly in Indiana, are public schools. But when we get into why were some were started, as Kevin indicated, perhaps as alternative schools. And alternative schools, we have to be careful there too, because we can overplay what an alternative school is. If the public school is designed to serve all children through public dollars, then why is it the public school cannot serve all children through public dollars? Are we saying that some children are more challenging to serve, as is the case? We know that's true. But why is it we don't use the resources and the funding to then serve those children in the public school setting?
But,
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say,
Just to interject for a second, because we're not used to this format.
Right.
And this is the first time we've done it. This is civil discourse now. If folks are listening or watching, we're coming to you from Indianapolis, Indiana, Big Hat Books, 6510 Cornell Avenue. We have a live studio audience with us here. And we're discussing charter schools with Kevin Davis and Carol Craig, and I apologize for interrupting.
oh, that's all right,
the call,
Mark. You interrupt me a lot, so that's
not
fine.
often enough. Go ahead.
That's true. So, anyway, Carol, you were talking about schools and public schools, and as we pointed out, charter schools are public schools. I do want to get into the funding in a little bit,
yes.
how they're funded.
That's right.
Charter schools versus
That's right.
traditional public schools. But one of the things I think you talked about was the idea of open enrollment. And I can let Kevin address this. My understanding of charter schools is they can't pick and choose their students, contrary to what people say. They have to do, if they have too many applying, they have to do it through a lottery system. Kevin, can you speak to that?
Well, that's absolutely true. It is open enrollment, again, it's public education, so if they sign up through the lottery process or through the registration process, then they are taken into that school. Now,
and let me ask you real quick, how do they do the lottery? I was curious about that. I mean,
well,
we attorneys always are
Sure.
concerned about the mechanics.
Do they use
Absolutely.
ping pong balls?
Yeah, do they use ping pong balls?
some form of that, yes.
Okay.
You know, whether
And
it's
I don't
ping
mean
pong
to
balls or
divert
things
you
that
too much
you pull
from
out,
that.
and
Just curious about that.
yes, usually overseen by an accounting firm.
Okay.
That type of thing, and verified so that, you know, there is no chance of any favoritism or anything like that. So it is very, very strict and straightforward process to make sure that we serve any schools. Now, let me get to the point, and again, another great reason why an extended conversation on this is great. And I will go ahead and use the example that I have the most familiarity with the alternative school that I helped to found, I'm sorry. And it was an alternative school. And I cannot tell you how many times I sat with parents and I explained to them about the school's mission and vision and what would be going on in this school. And many times the light would go on with the parents and the students that, oh, wow, thank you. This is exactly what we needed.
And this was in the Carmel district?
In Carmel, Noblesville, around that area. However, there would be times when I would get students that I would read through different notes and comments that perhaps they were wanting to attend this school because they had several friends who were here and really needing this school. So I liked the opportunity to be able, in a counseling mode, to be able to say, to point out all the great things that were going on at Carmel Clay schools and Noblesville schools that might be more appropriate for this student. So even though it was open enrollment, some counseling was really necessary there. And I think that definitely goes on within charter schools, but is it a good thing or a bad thing? And I think it's a good thing.
In terms of why there was you mentioned the book in the early 80s and how there was a notion that charter schools were needed. So when you say that, implicit in that is we're looking at outcome, we're looking at quality of the education being provided to the students in the charter schools. Would that be correct? Not just the idea that you can go to someplace different because it's a different environment.
Oh, absolutely. The charter school movement has to be about quality. I mean, we're talking about education reform here, and it's
and I'm not trying to ask questions to trap you at all.
Sure.
But there are certain things that I look at in terms of when you mentioned Carmel Clay, and I'm thinking we fund our schools on a very primitive basis, and that's reliance upon the property tax. And that means that a school system, over half of its funding, is going to come from a tax that's based essentially on, to some degree, the wealth of that area. So you have per pupil expenditures that are much more pliable, let's say, in an area like Carmel Clay, where the property tax base is much higher than you have in other areas of the state.
That was true 6-7 years ago.
Yes.
That has changed, and
Yes,
I don't know,
there's
Carol,
been
if you want to.
Well, there has been some change. The state has now taken that over. So that, now what we don't like is that we do have the cap on property tax right now, but the state has taken that over in terms of how money is allocated to school districts.
So we no longer have the disparity between districts based on property tax.
We have disparity between districts because of resources, period. Whether or not I can say it's actually because of the property tax, I'm not that certain, but we have huge disparities. All you have to do is drive to the Indianapolis Public Schools, to some of those schools, and do an assessment. Just don't look at the buildings, because the Indianapolis Public Schools done a fabulous job with capital projects and being sure that we don't have rundown schools. So they look fabulous, but they don't compare in terms of resources and accommodations for students when you talk about IT labs and that kind of thing.
I was talking to a lawyer, this was about 15 years ago, about the effect of per pupil expenditures on the outcome of education.
Right.
I went to DePauw. They threw money at resources, and we had a lot of resources. But that's post-secondary, I know, but he was saying, well, money doesn't mean anything in education. I said, great, you live in Carmel?
Thank you.
Why don't you guys swap your
Right.
tax base with Indianapolis
Right.
Public Schools per pupil and go
That's
from there?
right. That's
But
right.
Carol, isn't it true that IPS has some of the highest per pupil expenditures in the state? I mean,
Yes.
they're one of the top.
Yes, they do, but the question should be, what is necessary to serve all children well? So when we talk about, yes, it has the highest, but when you think about what is needed and how is it spent, because I'm not going to try to say that at all times in all areas that the money is probably spent in the best way possible for all children, but we have to ask, are more resources needed? As being a former principal of urban children, I would say absolutely so. But some of that should come from the community. The Carmel community has a tremendous advantage in terms of the resources, not only just within the schools itself, but the whole community support. And that's one of the things that the NAACP is promoting for urban schools, for schools that have struggles with academics with children, is more community schools. Community schools around the nation through, for example, the Harlem Zone, the Harlem Children's Zone, the broader and bolder approach that's now being used in Newark. Some of those are based upon taking the resources that are already in the community and having them integrated and wrap around the schools so that you're able to get what the students are missing. The one thing that concerns me and concerns our organization about the continued movement for charter schools is that it's only a piece of a puzzle. We have to go back and define what is our problem. Our problem is that we have not successfully educated all children. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I certainly would.
When we look at, well, who are those children? Those are children that are at the bottom. So you can say that with charter schools, they accept those children. Well, I can agree with that. But where are the majority of children still? They're still in the traditional public schools. If we continue to take money from the public schools, the traditional schools, where will we be when we need all of those resources? For each charter school that comes off, those are dollars that are coming off the public schools because it doesn't equate equally. And then the very fact that it's open enrollment, what the educators and those who do the research, and I am constantly doing my education research, what they've shown is that it's those families who have social capital that end up accessing better opportunities. Families with social capital. And I appreciate, Kevin, that you said that you talked with some families to try to see if that might be a better option. But for the most part, you have those, I've watched as principal, you have those families who are more active, who are more engaged, who have more connections, who have more access to resources, that will move away from a school that they deem is not serving their child. So the studies show that there's still tremendous risk that you'll have only those families who initiate that kind of movement who are taking a chance. And also, those are the ones who do the research on which schools have the higher quality. Because as we know, all the charter schools are not equally serving. Particularly the Ball State schools are not serving their students nearly as well, if we can say, as some of Mayor Ballard's schools. So we are not having an opportunity as we would.
Who's Mayor Ballard?
Just kidding.
One interrupt you again. This is Civil Discourse Now. This is January 5th, 2012. We are shooting live on Indiana Talks Network. That is going on, is it Live 365 or 360? It's Live 365. We're shooting from Big Hat Books, 6510 Cornell Avenue in Indianapolis. It's in the broadcast section of Indianapolis. If you're not familiar with Indianapolis, our guests are Kevin Davis, who's Chief Operating Officer of the Indiana Public Schools Charter Association, and Carol Craig, who's co-chair of the Education Committee of Greater Indianapolis NAACP, amongst other things. Both have years of experience in education, and we're discussing charter schools today. And I apologize for interrupting again, but I had to get the little.
That's okay.
Things about the show.
I do want Kevin to respond to what Carol said, but one thing I do want to clarify at the outset, and I want to be correct. I want you all to correct me if I'm wrong.
We will.
I'm sure you will. Traditional public schools get the per pupil expenditure formula, plus they get facilities money. Charter schools only get the per pupil expenditures. They don't get the facilities money.
That is
so
correct.
They're actually educating students for less than the traditional public
That is
school.
correct.
And then real quick question on that.
That was the extent of my knowledge, Mark. You might need to ask the guests beyond that.
Is there, and this has to do with transparency in government across the board, and so this could be a really silly question on my part. Is there some place where they post numbers on where dollars go, how much, and what the percentage is, or is that a pipe dream that I have?
Absolutely.
It is a pipe dream?
No, absolutely they post the numbers, and I believe you can get those through the DOE website, doe.in.gov. As the legislative sessions appear, obviously with the budget talks, if you get on the in.gov websites, the Republicans and the Democrats will, post out their models, and quite frequently they'll include the per pupil funding for schools and charter schools throughout.
Kevin, I have found that is very limited. Yes, you can get the dollar amount, but when you talk about transparency with accountability, that has been the issue. I've had several conversations with the deputy mayor here in Indianapolis, David Clough, and we have had very engaging conversations. I appreciate it each time that he's made time on his calendar, but he has admitted himself that they have been quite short in terms of transparency. And if you look at their website, he has admitted that that website is not up to par, and he has a goal of increasing that. We have also talked about the accountability, because I've indicated to him that you can only see, or you can only find out test score information. I ask about those students who once started at the school but are no longer there. Now, not to say that's not an issue with all schools, but you cannot find the numbers in terms of those students who were either counseled out because of not a fit for the charter schools. The Indianapolis Public Schools Superintendent, Dr. Eugene White, has some actual numbers from one of the schools, and it's over 100, where he has the actual names, and the students' families have given that information to him, that were counseled out because they were not a fit.
And to clarify, the student enrolls for the semester in the school, and if they're counseled out as not a fit, or for some other reason leave that school, the school keeps the money?
Yes.
And
Well,
then they go back to the public school.
That's
And-
right.
And it goes both ways.
That's right, it goes both ways.
It absolutely goes both ways. There's a count day where the money is determined, and,
That's right.
and right now, there are 2 count days, but one where the money is determined. And if a student moves after that time, then the money stays with the school that he or she was at during the count day. And it happens very frequently both directions.
It does.
And you know, at charter schools, most of them keep their enrollment at their capacity throughout the school year.
We
And
don't have any data on that.
And that's one thing that's frustrating, I know, about a lot of aspects of governmental functioning is not having the right
That's right.
information.
Yeah.
And then conclusions are made about things and it's not there.
Well, and Carol was absolutely right. My initial hesitancy, as far as your question is, the data is there, but you have to really be good to dig for it and find it.
And then a tremendous amount is not there.
Absolutely.
For example, and this is no criticism of the leadership of this school, because I have a lot of respect for the leadership of Ed Power. As we know, Charles Tinley is the highest performing school, period. Well, I don't know how to word that. I know with charter schools, they're one of the highest performing academically for the socioeconomic status of those children, okay? And they send a high percentage to college. What people don't know is they also have a high suspension rate, 48% suspension rate for 2011, which is half of the student body. Also, and I'm not saying this is not a good thing to say that all your children are accepted into college. That's what you want, all your children accepted into college. But what was your graduation rate from the time they were first started? For that school, it's 78%.
If the goal of the school, and this goes back to the notion of, I think Indianapolis tried this in the IPS system, where schools were set on tracks for doing specific things. I think
Yes,
Shortridge
exactly.
was college prep, high school. Tech had more of vocational arts. They had different tasks that the schools were
Yes.
doing. So yes, if a school is set up so that those students are on a college track, then you look at how many go on to college, etc. Are charter schools being set up for vocational arts as well, or things that are not, and I'm sitting here speaking from the background of having been purely college track when I was in high school. I mean, I couldn't run a saw or, fix anything, and males were not allowed to take home ec when I was in high school. That was how long.
Oh, you go really back.
I know. I learned how to cook macaroni and cheese after college.
So I think Kevin probably should answer.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the key. The charter school concept allows you to set up a school for a targeted mission, and it could be, a way to provide the curriculum, and it could be a specific, segment of the population.
Have schools been set up here in Indiana
Oh, absolutely.
for vocational? And I'm saying vocational, I mean,
yes.
none.
Oh, absolutely. And, examples, Excel centers are new in Indiana here, in the Indianapolis area, and they're dealing with I would say late intervention model. Okay, so something that we hope 20 years from now we can eliminate late intervention. But, what do you do with people who did drop out, do need to come back and get further education to do better? Excel Centers is targeting some of that population. There are some real specific populations that are, because of the charter school law, we're able to target those. Another example would be the Hope Academy. And it targets recovering addicts.
Well, and I guess, and I think that's valuable, looking at those populations. I guess what I'm looking at is, say somebody doesn't want to go to college, but they want to pursue some type of data processing job.
Sure.
And when I was in high school, again, this dates me, we had shop, we had different classes that people would go into to learn skills that were non-academic but prepared them for the future at the same time as they were taking some other, traditional subjects. You're talking about trying to recapture people and intervene and get people who have gone off the path for various reasons. I'm saying a kid's getting out of junior high and he's got an opportunity, or she's got an opportunity to go to these different schools, and is looking for a charter school that's going to have something that's set up for IT, or that's set up for, I don't know, paramedic training, or although that probably requires a degree today. Something that would be a non-traditional academic, and it's not looking at them as being a class that has some kind of need that is, you know what I mean.
Oh, absolutely. And I think I can say this, but it's just at the preliminary discussion stage. But through the IPCSA, we've had discussions, initial discussions with ITT Tech to provide some of their services to students as they're also completing their high school education, so they can graduate with some of those specific skills in some specific areas. And there are also many of the charter schools that have internship programs that go on concurrently with their curriculum, traditional high school curriculum.
Yeah, but traditional public schools also have.
Yes,
exactly,
absolutely.
and have had for years. The Indianapolis Public Schools with the Career and Technology Center. We have Washington Township with the J. Everett Light. We have Lawrence Township with the McKenzie Center. Those are excellent programs that have been in traditional public schools. So the question would be, why would we again need to take off funds for a charter school for that purpose? And then when you ask about the select schools, we used to use the term select schools, but right now the Indianapolis Public Schools, and so does Lawrence Township. Lawrence Township has magnet programs. So we have interest programs in the traditional public schools based upon interest, whether it's law and policy, which is Shortridge. Addicts is the medical magnet, and I was just over there for their ribbon cutting it was just unbelievable what they were doing to match the lab work that's going on at IUPUI.
Which is right next door.
Yes, fantastic. So those opportunities are available, and they're going to be pushed more in terms of vocational, but we use the term vocational, but career tech. But I want to say this before you comment, Kevin. We have to watch something that could easily happen, and that is resegregation. Also, when we talk about those kids who don't want to go to college. What we found out with a lot of children of color and low income was not that they don't want to go to college. They never had the encouragement or the resources or the opportunities. So we don't want to, this is another thing that's fuzzy, we don't want to push so much for vocation that, and as if we haven't, as if we're making the assumption that these children don't. And plus, 80% of the jobs of the future are going to require post-secondary education. So they're going to require something in terms of college. So why anymore are we separating those children who we say don't want to, but don't have opportunities?
And I do want to, and we'll go to Kevin here in a second. I do want to point out, I agree with that. The thing is, when you're in 9th grade, 10th grade, do you really know what you want to do with the rest of your life? Often you don't. Mark did. Mark wanted to be a lawyer since he was.
I wanted to be a lawyer since I was 6.
And I wanted to be a teacher.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's unusual. I wanted to be. I think maybe I started out to want to be a veterinarian, then I went on to other things, and then I foolishly got into law. But
no, you foolishly thought you could play baseball at one point.
Well, that's true. But my inability to hit a curveball fixed that.
Amongst other
Let's
things.
go to Kevin. Kevin's been itching to respond.
Well, I don't want to mix, concepts. Sometimes they get a little blurry that way. And let me be clear on one thing. I believe personally, and I believe IPCSA believes, and I believe the legislature has shown that it believes is on the funding issue is that, the principle that the funding follows the student. The funding follows the student. Okay, the state has a pot of money that goes with this student for public education. And the charter school concept, it just opened up new opportunities and new choices for parents, so that just because you live in a geographical area, you don't go to one school and the pot of money goes to that school. Here's another choice that you have, and yes, my money for my kids, that pot should go to this other school. And I think it's a simple concept, and I think we blur it quite often by just saying blanket that the charter schools are taking money, and especially how wrong is it to say taking money from public education, because it is public education, okay? It's just a shift of the money. So, you know, we just have to be able to live with understanding that.
But then that goes to a point that Carol referenced briefly, and that was resegregation.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's the very real threat that we, and I was in high school during the busing period, and we were not affected. I was in a rural high school where, you know, I think that there were 4 African American students, and that's one of the things that, you know, we're all African Americans because of mitochondrial DNA. But we had 4 or 5 African American students in our school, and I don't think we had any Latino students. I mean, I went to Western High School, which Ryan White was expelled from at one point, but that's a different story. But the thing is, there's a very real possibility that there would be areas, although today, I don't know, our society seems to have changed. This last election showed that we are a much more heterogeneous society, and people are more accepting of others. But I still could see a fear there that it could be resegregated.
Oh, I agree with that. That as public educators, we have to look at all those factors. And, you know, I started my introduction, you know, purposely, because I think we get to that point where we don't understand that people that enter education enter as people with a passion to move students or young people from this point to a point where they can be successful in their adult life, okay? And that block that we put up, that there's, you know, for instance, that I changed sides in my career, I don't see it at all. I mean, not one bit, okay? I'm a educator that has worked in the public school education portion, and we have to all work together to make sure those kind of things don't happen. We've got to look at this charter school. You know, we're not where we need to be. We didn't all of a sudden make this charter school law, and then 10 years ago we adopted it in Indiana, and boom, we have it fixed to the education problems. We have to look at where we are. We have to analyze it. We have to look at how well we're analyzing the data. And, you know, who knows where we're going to be 20 years from now. But the thing is, the thing I can say about the charter school law and the impact that it's had is it has really started some significant change and discourse in that direction. In that, you know, when A Nation at Risk came out in 1983, there was a lot of tinkering going on. You know, a lot of we need to change, but, you know, just little bitty things that really didn't make a big difference. I think the charter school movement has really, really accelerated that and has helped with that situation.
Well, I think there were, sorry to interrupt, Mark, but Carol was talking about segregation in terms of more, well, you got parents who care and are involved and other parents who aren't. Mark started talking more about racial segregation. My understanding of charter schools is that they actually have a higher in Indiana have a higher population of minorities than do traditional public schools. So they're actually, I don't want to say overrepresented, but they do have a higher percent, and a higher percent of poor students too.
Yes, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, in Gary, the number right now is about 25% of the students in Gary attend a charter school.
Okay.
So it's very high there.
And I'd like to comment on that because that is an issue in terms of if we have more students of color who are being in experimental labs, and I have to put it that way because we have such a high percentage of schools with low performance. When we track all of the schools, many of the schools at the very bottom are charter schools in terms of academics. That means we have students of color sitting in those schools where they have had years and years of failure, and we know one happens to be Imagine East, the Imagine schools with a history of failure there. At one point, the NAACP was trying to work with the school board to see how we could assist, and found that so challenging that we decided we wouldn't go further. But we're talking about experimenting, and then we have the Stanford study that just came out.
Yes.
And indicated that children of color were faring well with the charter schools in Indiana. Well, that is a short-term study, and there's another study coming out. This is by the Talent Alliance that will be more of a long-term study that will compare. And when we're looking at how students are performing academically, we have to keep looking at the whole piece. If we're just going to compare a few students with students from the schools from which they have come, we know those students are not performing that well. That's really not where we want to go. Where we want to go is up, where we have the huge gap still. So we've had the magnet schools, we've had the charter schools, but we still have the huge gap in achievement as to where they should be.
Well,
that came out in the Black Expo report.
Let's look at the CREDO study, because
Yes.
that's huge. And,
Yes.
and CREDO stands for the Center for Research on Education Outcomes, and it's through Stanford University, and it is independent.
Was this the 2009 study or more recent?
No, this is the recent.
And that's really interesting. In 2009, the initial CREDO study included 16 schools across the nation, and basically came out with the headline that says, at this point, charter school students fare no better than traditional public school students.
But then there's a 2012 study.
Right.
Well, there's a 2011 study with Indiana, and then they just refreshed it a couple weeks ago. And, what it says boiled down, and I'll take some of the big highlights, and you said look at the whole picture. Let's look at the whole picture. The whole picture of this report says that charter school students in a year of academic study across the state have an additional 1.5 month gain over traditional public school students in both math and reading. And in Indianapolis, that's even more significant. I believe it's 2 months and 3 months with math being higher.
And more particularly with the mayor's schools over the other schools.
Right. And so, what we need to do with that data is all look at it together
Yeah.
as educators and a society. And, not just look at, okay, we can point out one school that is failing, because, we believe in this system. That end of the failing schools, eventually being designated and found out and closed down is part of the system. Okay, that will happen, and it needs to happen at some point. So, let's look at the whole picture. If that, kind of thing is the whole picture here, and I will be the first to say it's not because, boom, they have the charter school label. Okay, what's going on in those schools?
Exactly, what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And what can we spread throughout our system of educating these young people as far as best practices to move them forward?
And I don't mean to sound really vague and mushy on things, but there's a societal element, and I think that there's a prejudice against intellectual pursuits. I think it's typified by the attitude people have toward math. And I made a comment before we went on the air. I had a high SAT score on math, but I didn't take any math in college. People will make light of people who are studious in this society, who are more prone towards education. There was a high school near Kokomo that had gotten an award for improvement on academics, Eastern High School. And I was reading a website, I forget how I came across it, and somebody commented on the website that if those guys on the football team spent more time in the weight room than they did in the classroom, we'd have a decent football team. Now, I'm sorry to say, I really think that typifies a large number of parents out there. They don't necessarily care about education. They'll give lip service to things. And they might be great parents and loving their kids and stuff, but the stress that is put on things in this society at certain points is not something that's going to relay itself through a child excelling in classes at school.
Well, what do we honor in the country, period? So we're talking about entertainment and sports, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what we reward. So we're getting what we espouse. So that's not unusual. I mean, it's unfortunate that our country is going that way. But I don't know where you were going with that. But a lot of our parents care but we don't have a society that is rewarding. And plus, we don't have a society right now, an education society, that is really putting the resources to get all children at the highest level possible. When we ask, is there some improvement? Yes, that study did show there's some improvement, but we need some long-term studies, and that's what's getting ready to come out next year with the Talent Alliance study. And I work with IUPUI, with the Center for Urban and Multicultural Education, CUNE, and I asked them, I had conversation with them during the spring, about whether or not they could help us do a good research in terms of what's happening with education. And again, they continue to come up and hear about, we have to be careful with the charter school movement, that that's not viewed as a panacea. And I don't hear Kevin say that, but if we look at what's talked about and where is the most energy being spent, the most energy in Indiana is being spent with expansion of charter school and vouchers.
And finally, we're doing something, Carol. I mean, all the frustration you
conflict,
had.
I like that.
Yeah. Okay.
you know, you spent so much time of your career saying, oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And then now finally it's happening.
But
this is the most exciting time this state has ever been in.
I agree, this is most exciting because when we have more conversation,
right.
we have more dialogue.
Absolutely.
But we need to keep moving so that we have balance in approaches.
Absolutely.
Since there is no one approach, and I've had this conversation with the mayor's office, let's have more balanced approaches. The research is showing from the ones who do the education research with those children who are not served as well, who happen to be more likely children of poverty.
But they're choosing the charter schools.
Okay, who's choosing the charter schools? The ones that have more social capital. And when you do the tracking of how much is in and out, how much is where they're going in and then they're leaving. See, we don't have that data. We only have it by word of mouth with families that find out that the programs are no different. In fact, if the charter schools were designed to meet the needs, at first they talked about, well, select interest, because I remember that being a conversation, just like the magnet, select interest, as well as meeting alternative school needs. Well, if that's the case, what's going on in those schools? As we've looked at those schools that are managed by charter management companies, even the ones with the 4 takeover schools here, so that'd be Charter USA and Ed Power, as we've examined what's going on, they have extended day. That's the best practice, extended day. They have Saturday and Sunday. And then they have retention. They have retention where if you don't master it, the concepts after a certain period of time, at the end of the year, then you're retained. So they have high retention. I'm not saying those aren't good, those are best practices, but what if we had more resources for those concepts to be in the traditional schools? It seems like then that was a ploy just to go off and have your charter school and say you were doing something different, but those are traditional educational practices. And when you mentioned earlier about the things you couldn't do as a principal or you couldn't do in the traditional schools, one of the things in conversation with Dr. Bennett that he talked the most about, he said, Carol, you can't fire and get rid of bad teachers. I said, sir, that is absolutely not true.
And I would agree with you on that.
Okay, thank you, because any teacher that I had as a principal that was ineffective, I was able to move them either up as better, which was the goal, or they moved out, and I'm not just talking about I sent them to another school.
Yeah.
They resigned or I put them up for termination.
Yeah.
So I didn't see that as an obstacle. The curriculum, 1 year as principal, I went to the Department of Education. At that time, this is how far back it was with Dean Evans. And I wanted to opt out of the requirements for my curriculum so that I could meet the needs of my students. At that time, you had to go and have a hearing and ask for a waiver.
Absolutely.
I did, and I got it. When I needed more resources, that was the biggest issue, was resources from the community. So we started the Bridges to Success program with community schools.
Just to interrupt real quick. This is Civil Discourse Now. We are coming to you from Broad Ripple, which is on the north side of Indianapolis, from Big Hat Books at 6510 Cornell Avenue. Our guests here today are Kevin Davis, as Chief Operating Officer of Indiana Public Schools Charter Association, and Carol Craig, who both are longtime educators. She's co-chair of the Education Committee of the Greater Indianapolis NAACP. We're talking about charter schools. I apologize for interrupting.
No,
this is the first time we've been on Indiana Talks Live. And Paul, go ahead.
Well, Carol, I think you made a lot of good points. And one in particular, I think you're going to get a lot of support of, even from conservatives like myself, is that traditional public schools are overregulated, that they need more freedom to do what they think is best. And the curriculum is a major part of that. And I think Kevin certainly will agree with that. One part you did talk about some charter schools are not servicing their students, and I think Kevin and I may have the same position on that, and then they leave. Well, that's the system. If a parent doesn't think the school servicing their child properly, they move to another school.
Okay, the point with that is they're disproportionately minority students, and then you get into what does the research show about students and families when they continually change schools? There's insufficient research, but the amount that you get, the amount that you're able to find has to do with the mobility issues of families.
Well, there is insufficient research, and I think we just have to acknowledge that. There may be some schools that are charter schools where a disproportionate number of people are leaving and going back.
Right.
That may be. Right. That's part of the system. And again, it goes both ways. And there are some schools that are retaining, 100% of their students along the way. So, we need more data before we make blanket statements.
Two things real quick. One is it more difficult to shut down a charter school that's not succeeding? Is that a difficult thing to do? Because some of the literature I read said that was a problem that's being faced in other jurisdictions.
Well, it's from our standpoint, it's a key part of the equation. Okay, I started out, here we are, we're free from these regulations. On the other end, the trade-off is, hey, we're going to have a contract that this is what we're going to do with this school. Okay, and at the end of this, if we don't accomplish what we agreed needed to be done with this charter school, then we shouldn't be in existence. Now, the key is the authorizers have a huge burden and a huge task in front of them, and we're only 10 years in and barely 10 years in because we had a slow start with Indiana. The authorizers need to have a system that is good and transparent and clear so that when a school is starting to fail, everybody sees it, everybody knows it, it's talked about, it's understood, and at that point, if that particular charter school failed, that's okay. That's part of the system.
Another point that I wanted to address is, what about teacher-pupil ratio? When I went to my alumni reunion at DePauw last June, the president of the university was proud to say that our endowment was so large that we were going from a 9-to-1 ratio of students per professor to a 7-to-1. And I know from personal experience in class settings and in a public school, if you got 30 or 35 students, it can be fairly chaotic even on the best of days. I know from a university experience that a classroom of 30 students with one professor can be engaging, but if you're in a seminar or if you have a class with 7 or 8 students and one professor, that can be much more conducive to acquiring information. Is that a key to what we need to do for success?
It's all over the board. That's the beauty of the system. There are charter schools out there that have the same size classes as traditional public schools, some that may even have a few that are larger. In average, some have tiny classes.
But generally, though, should it be a goal that we have more teachers and a lower ratio of students to teachers?
The research that I have been privy to over the years has indicated more and more that for children of poverty and for children of color, because there's a disconnect when you talk about the teaching staff, that lower ratios have more of a positive impact. And what has happened, I know particularly with the Indianapolis Public Schools, is that the the number of students per class has increased dramatically. Dramatically, where we have classrooms in the high 30s and the 40s, the low 40s, but a lot of them in the high 30s, and they need that individual attention.
I've taught political science at the University of Indianapolis. I remember one of my textbooks, there was this really old study. I mean, it was old. It was probably 40 years old by the time I was teaching. Teaching the study. No, that talked about how that there's no correlation between class size.
That's right.
Is it? And I've also, another thing I've done is I've substituted in Wayne schools and Pike schools, and I can tell you that's not been my experience.
Exactly. Those were the early studies, and now the more recent studies say particularly for children of color and low income, because of the need for more of the relationship between student and teacher.
Well, and one thing I did find out is you have basically three groups. You have, and I'll probably say something politically incorrect, which wouldn't be the first time. You have the people in the middle, then you have the high learners, and then you have the people who are low learners, or they don't learn as fast.
Right.
And trying to teach to one person trying to teach to all three different groups is very difficult.
The 3 R's that are, important in schools: rigor, relevance, relationship.
Oh, my high school's reading, writing, and writing.
But the relationship part
the relationship
cannot be overplayed. We all probably can name a teacher that made a difference in our lives, and it's because we were able to get to some point of a relationship there, and just logically, it's harder and harder to do with 35 and 40 and 45 in the classroom.
And the size of the school itself makes a tremendous difference.
And that's one point I wanted to make. I think there was a big problem with the schools getting bigger and bigger and bigger. North Central, Pike, even Carmel. I just think the larger schools are not.
Yeah, but I went to a country, not country day school. I went to a country school, meaning like tractors were across the road from it. We did not have calculus for mathematics in our school. We did not have any courses in philosophy. We did not have anything other. We only had 2 foreign languages, 3 if you count Latin. And I've never been to Latin America, so it didn't do me any good.
Yeah.
But we really were limited on resources, and when I encountered people at DePauw who had gone to large high schools, or talked to people who went to North Central, because of the size of the school, they had more resources there. And that was one advantage. I mean, I agree that a large school, like I went to DePauw, I didn't want to go to a large university, but we had 2,200 students, and of course we were older, and we acted more juvenile at times, but they were able to provide us with classes, and I can understand the large schools. You want to avoid that on secondary, but there are resources there that can be provided to students too.
Well, I think major part of the problem is the discipline in the school. And being able, when you're walking down the hallway, every teacher knowing who you are is very helpful.
Sure. That might be a talisman too.
Yes. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, Carol.
Let's see, because we went a couple different ways with that. But with the large schools, yes, you are able to have more opportunities in terms of the curriculum and course offerings. But with that, you want to be able to attract the very best. And if you don't have sufficient dollars to attract the best, then you end up with a wash. I know too many times at the big schools, as particularly in the urban, so I have to say IPS because this is not an issue with a Carmel, because there's a totally different attraction based upon the resources and the student body and the families. So you take a teacher that is certified in calculus. Well, the best example is physics. And so there's an opening at Carmel and there's an opening at Northwest. The history shows they go to Carmel. So what you need is you need more resources and more incentives so you can incentivize the best quality teachers to come to the urban. So again,
how much is a Carmel teacher going to make versus the IPS teacher? First year
physics. Right now, I don't know.
It's going to be very similar.
I was
I mean,
gonna say,
there's
I
not a
think-
discrepancy. There may be a
But they're
misconception
coming
out there
for,
that
they're coming for
they make more.
environment.
Well, that's true.
Right.
That's true.
They're coming for the environment.
Because there's a lot more discipline
Exactly,
issues in
so
the
you need more
Northwest.
incentives in the urban to bring them in.
So 2 points, I always like to say that way I can say something and Paul doesn't interrupt me because he thinks there's
Waiting for the
there's
second
another
one.
shoe that's gonna drop.
And it never drops.
Yeah, it never does. 2 points is, one, we need to spend more money on education, meaning we need to pay significantly to attract the best people for teaching.
Exactly.
And 2, to provide for more teachers, so we have a lower ratio of
Exactly.
students to teachers.
And I want to respond to
These are
that
the big
too.
issues.
And 3, to be able to spend money on the resources that the students need, so we cut up a couple of aircraft carriers so we can buy more computers and build better buildings, and that provides jobs for people who are building all that. Now, the second thing is, see,
I thought you were on 3 and now you're at 2.
those were subparts.
I love that.
Those
Oh,
were
subparts. Do A, B, C when you're doing the
Oh,
subparts.
I'm sorry.
Because I want to respond to your
Okay, I was
diatribe.
doing Latin numeral 1 and Latin numeral 2.
All right.
But the other part is that Jonathan Koetzel is an educational authority. I don't know how else to describe him. I heard him speak at a demonstration in Washington, D.C. in 1976 for the People's Democracy. And he has said that charter schools pose a threat of a capitalistic element coming in and for-profit organizations coming in and taking advantage of
The
the system.
market-based.
Yes.
And I want Kevin to respond to that, but the notion that we've shortchanged education in this country, I just find phenomenal. I did education issues for Rex Early back in '96. I remember contacting the Department of Education about how much we spent on education, and how it's increased over the years. And I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was like the last 30 years we had increased education spending by 50% above inflation rate. The average teacher in Indiana makes $50,000 a year. That's not bad.
Oh,
It's
that's
the
not the average now.
it was
It's in the
ATF.
40s.
It was like 49.
And that same
years ago.
person has how much to pay back in educational loans?
No more than an attorney, that's for sure.
Well, but
No,
my
I
point
think the problem is the environment. I think the pay is fine. The problem is the discipline issues in the classroom and dealing with those. But the notion that we spend 50% of our money on education, and
Well, let's-
administrators, we have no offense, we have so many administrators
that was the point
in
I was making.
IPS making over $100 grand,
I agree.
$150 grand. It's just top heavy. If those resources were going to the classroom, that would be better. So-
And you're both former teachers and former administrators.
And I insulted both of them probably.
Yeah, so do you agree we have too many administrators in the educational system?
I do, because remember, we're not talking about the principal level. There are a lot of administrators
Yes.
outside the principal level. So, Paul, I do agree with you. I believe the principal has to be paid equal to any CEO.
Well, what do you mean, any CEO? We have
Well,
CEOs making
That's right.
$5 million a
Well,
year.
that'd be great. But
You
comparable.
go back into it.
But comparable to what they're doing in terms of, I had 1,200 7th and 8th graders as a first-year principal. But nevertheless, I do think there's a lot of top-heavy,
Yeah.
all in between there and up.
Right.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And
And wait,
before we forget, I want him to address the corporate side, the
Okay.
issue that school,
I hate
charter
to-
schools are
I hate to
corporate.
challenge him like this, but he almost argued against himself on it.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time.
I hate
That's
to get him
a lot.
going.
That's the benefit of liberal arts education. We can argue about it.
He's a former debater, he will talk ad nauseum about that.
Well, first of all, I mean, it's one of those things that we have to just clear up, because I think people, not intentionally, but this whole idea of, for-profit education in the charter school world, you need to understand it. First of all, in Indiana, every charter school, the charter is held by a nonprofit 501c3 board. Every charter school.
And that's an
Now,
excellent point to clarify.
yeah, and people just need to understand that. Now, that board, just like a traditional school board, can make a decision in any area of its operation to bring in companies, whether they're for-profit or not for-profit. Schools, whether charter school or traditional public schools, can decide to take their custodial services and hire a for-profit organization to do that. There are some there are some in Indiana that have taken some of the management side of the running a charter school, as in some tasks that administrators would traditionally do, and hired a for-profit company to come in and do that.
Have any of them done that in terms of the educational, in
Yes.
other words, the teachers?
Yes, and sometimes it is bring in what has proven to be a successful educational program from outside the state that has worked elsewhere, come on in here and help us, train our teachers and to present that. But the nonprofit board at any time can fire that company. The school is run by that nonprofit board. In Indiana, it's just black and white, it has to be that way.
Yeah, but then you get into, and I don't mean to split hairs on this.
Yeah.
You get into situations where, say they have a very long contract with that private entity that they brought into the school district. If there's, like right now, and I know this is apples and oranges, or maybe apples and tractors or something, but we have a 75-year lease on the Indiana toll road. And so if you put a long enough contract in there, there's no real accountability on the other party to the contract.
That would be a problem, but the beauty of the charter school model, again, is the authorizer oversight and the length of the contract. I mean, the school's not even contracted to go that long.
Okay, and I'm not making these arguments because I am passionately for this position.
You
I'm
make a
making
great
these
point.
points because I think we need to clarify for our audience.
Absolutely.
I have a lot of concern too about our boards, and this is true across the board. If we take one of the charter schools that was just closed in September here in Indianapolis, and they had a board, how did we get so far along that there were financial issues, there were academic issues? How did we get that far when we talk about, well, a part of the system is that if they don't perform, then they're closed. Again, if we don't look at, these are people, these are families, we're taking the most vulnerable populations and subjecting them to experiments that will disrupt them. And that's in the literature about what happens with the disruption of these families. I have talked personally, and maybe you have too, with some of those families that were a part of that abrupt closing, where they did not have transparency throughout the time to know that there were issues. And I talked to the mayor's office about that. The transparency was not there. The frequent monitoring was not there. We don't want to wait to the end of the school year to find out that, oh, this school has been failing for years and now we're at the point where we're going to have to close. There should be, well, this is a recommendation, where quarterly the community can go online and see several factors, not just the test scores, but where are we financially? Where are we in terms of community resources? Where is the customer satisfaction survey? Where are the discipline issues? Where are we in terms of all the factors that should cause a school to be successful? And the board, evidently, was not doing their job. And several boards don't do their job.
To interrupt just a second again, I'm trying to do this on some kind of a format basis, and this is the first time we've streamed live on Live 365. We are coming to you from Broad Ripple at Big Hat Books. This is Civil Discourse Now. This is 6510 Cornell Avenue. Big Hat Books has a really neat selection of books. It's a privately owned, not a big box bookstore, so you can find a selection of books here you're not going to find other places.
And you have space upstairs where we are to rent.
Yes.
For political fundraisers or whatever. That's always what comes to mind first when
Well, they had birthday parties up here before too, and book signing parties, which we'll be doing one in January for my book.
Oh, you have a book coming out, Mark.
It's $1 Billion Balls, which is about collegiate basketball, kind of, and betting and stuff like that. They also have art for sale up here that's really kind of neat. We are shooting here today. It's January 5th, 2013. I always have to think about the years.
I know, you get that 13, that'll last about a month, and then you
Yeah,
regress.
but at my age, I'm so surprised it keeps getting higher. Our guests today are Kevin Davis, Chief Operating Officer of Indiana Public Schools Charter Association, and Carol Craig, who's co-chair of the Education Committee of Greater Indianapolis NAACP. You've also been in a startup of a not-for-profit Children in Law Policy Initiatives?
Yes, yes. I, along with Janae Hanger from...
I know Janae.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
She is fabulous. She was on the Disproportionality Committee, or the commission that was established by the governor. And that's how we got to know each other. And that commission was focused on issues of disparity, where we have low-income students disproportionately in the prison system, juvenile system, discipline problems from schools, suspensions, and dropouts. So that was the purpose of that commission. So after that, we got to talking, and right now we have 9 board members, most attorneys. Is that a bad thing?
It usually is a bad thing.
We have a legislator. We have two of us that are educators, and our goal is to form a coalition throughout the state to advocate for better child-friendly laws in our state that will better serve our children and save our children. When we look at Indiana compared to some other states, we are not doing well. We know we're near the bottom in education, health, arrest, and so forth. And
Well,
so,
thank God for Mississippi.
hey, right, for Mississippi.
That's
And
her point.
So our goal is to move it to the legislature and propose legislation that would be more child-friendly. The first thing we're moving on this year has to do with the discipline code that is in the statute for Indiana, and use more positive interventions that some other states have used rather than the punitive methods.
I think that might be an issue if we get time. I want to talk about more. But actually, Kevin was in the middle of addressing.
When I interrupted him.
And I'm trying to remember where I was.
Oh, I did that too.
But you were talking about the boards and the
boards, yeah.
transparency and the closure question, things like that. And really, I have to bring a little bit of newness to my job. I
Yes,
wasn't with the
right.
IPCSA during that time, or I have
right,
more
right.
specifics on the information, so I can't speak specifically to that. However, I don't think any of our current authorizers would say we are at the perfect place, we have the system figured out yet. I think that, as a matter of fact, I know that they are working collaboratively to try to iron out those issues and address everything that Carol mentioned here, which I totally agree with, that transparency needs to be there. You know, the closure part has to be part of the system, but it has to be done well, because it impacts families greatly when that happens, and it impacts other charter schools. For instance, charter schools that want to get a loan to build a building. If charter schools are too frequently closing down, that's a problem. I would guess that you will see legislation that standardizes that among authorizers coming forth here real soon.
And that's too, Kevin, why the NAACP is asking for a moratorium until we have more things ironed out, until there's more accountability, just to slow the pace down, and also so we can entertain a more balanced approach with other strategies that are just as powerful or not more research-based, such as community schools, the broader and bolder approach that's being used in promised neighborhoods.
Well,
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
Sure. And I just want to give the other end of that. Again, we talked about innovation and change, and first of all, I want to thank, as a career educator in Indiana, I want to thank the bold people, Teresa Lovers as one, that moved forward with the charter school law. And like I said before, it is the most exciting time of my career, and I think most educators that have been around for 35 or 40 years would say there is the most change going on right now than has gone on ever. And I challenge everyone to not circle back around and squash this and bring us back into, oh, we're not having this kind of discussion, discourse. I don't think we can call charter schools an experiment that is spiraling out of control that we need to rein in. I mean, look at what we just did with Credo. My goodness, okay? a month and a half of more education in a 12-month period. All right, let's keep this moving, and let's have the guts not to do what we've done so many times on so many different programs, which is spiral back around, get something exciting, wash it down, and then spiral again. Okay, let's keep the momentum going and have the courage to, continue to look at innovation and education reform.
Well, one thing that struck me when we went out to California, and a niece was graduating from a high school in California, and I have sat through so many commencements. I just, and I didn't go to my law school commencement. I played softball that day.
You know what commencement means? A beginning, not an end.
I know, but
you've probably heard that 1,000 times.
Yeah, I know. And I played softball the day of my law school commencement. I received my diploma from the woman who ran the law school, the dean's secretary. But when we were in California, I was listening to the announcements of where the students were attending college. And I remembered my own high school commencement and other commencements I've attended. And there they were saying that students were going to be attending Harvard and Brown and UCLA and UCal, which are excellent top. And our high schools here, Purdue and IU were excellent schools, Ball State. I mean, I graduated from DePaul. My high school, DePaul wasn't even announced during my graduation because I thought I was going to Indiana State. But those students in that class also, they were in a high school where students received letters just like jocks did for being, like, I was a state finalist in debate, so here's my grudge about this whole system coming out against coaches from when I was on. But the thing was, these students were being given letters just like varsity athletes were, but for academic achievements. And I think that's something that doesn't speak to the charter school necessarily, but it goes back to my point about we have kind of a bias in this state and in this system where, it was in the Day the Earth Stood Still, where Michael Rennie's character is describing to the child about how a flying saucer could go between planets. And this one guy is in the crowd goes, "Go ahead, mister, I think the kid's beginning to buy it." And the whole idea is when somebody's trying to rationally explain something, or we have intellectual pursuits, those aren't given as much of a reward.
That's absolutely correct. They are giving letters now.
They do?
Yes.
Can I go back and get my...
Well, we know you would not have earned any in college, we know that.
Oh, actually, in college I would have on debate, Paul.
On debate, okay.
Yes.
But some of your...
Now, that's not across the board, but I mean,
Not
they have
across.
started to do things.
Well,
like
that's
that.
good.
You have to have resources.
I hate to see athletics get so demeaned, and plus sports teaches you a lot.
Yes, it does, and my husband,
I'm not
it also,
demeaning.
all right, you're not
Yeah.
demeaning, but
No, but the thing is to say, okay, we have athletics, we have academics, and you should
Right.
do well in school, and your dad's going to give you $5 for every A you get on your report card or something like that, and you'll do well in the future. But you get a letter right now if you're on such and such a team,
Right.
and that's giving immediate gratification
Exactly.
to those kids.
That's right.
And that's very, of course, you didn't have to worry about it. You were strutting around the high school with your letter jacket and
Yeah,
everything, with all those baseball letters.
yeah, exactly.
But you do have to have the resources to do those.
And
kinds
so
of
we
things.
need to pump a bunch more money into the
Exactly.
system. We need to sell a couple of aircraft carriers,
This
carve
is
them up.
Mark's answer to everything is just give it more money.
And see, we need to do more with the community and the businesses around the schools that are in our city that could be more supportive.
Now, do property taxes still fund education at all?
Yes,
Because one of the things that we've talked about in other shows, I don't want to go off on another direction, is all these TIP districts being established in Indianapolis
Yeah,
are draining money, property tax money, whether they claim it or not, but they are, away from things like education.
That's one of the disparities between the traditional public schools and charter schools, is that the capital projects fund
Yeah, it's,
does not come to charter schools in any
And that's
form
funded by
at all.
property
Or-
taxes.
Or the transportation fund, which I believe, and I may be wrong
Yeah, I
there,
think you're right about that.
comes from property taxes.
and we have to remember
as well.
that $300 million was cut from the budget in Indiana for education.
Well, wait a minute,
Yeah.
but they found $500 million
exactly. Look.
someplace else.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
so is that kind of,
So, yeah, so think about that.
obviously, we didn't have the right courses in accounting for the people who were handling the books for the state.
I only find a quarter.
Well, one thing that you talked about, Carol, and this is getting off the subject a little bit of charter schools, but discipline.
Yes.
I've taught at college level at IUPUI, taught at University of Indianapolis, political science, and I've also substituted in a number of K through 12 schools in Pike and Wayne Townships. You can teach a class without interruption in college for the most part. When you're in K through 12, you consider it a success if you prevent the kids from killing each other. I mean, you can't be an educator, and I feel really sorry for those teachers because I would hear that term all the time that they've turned us into babysitters, and the discipline issue is a big problem because if you're trying to prevent discipline issues, you can't really teach.
Well, that is true, Paul, and it's very complex, and it's how we view children, how we talk about children, and how we work with children on developmental needs. As I said, I was in the middle school for 9 years. We spent a lot of time at that time talking about the developmental stages of early adolescence. We at that time had money, we had resources through grants where we could do a lot of professional development on what is a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, and 15-year-old. We know they go bonkers, right?
They're awash in hormones.
Exactly. If you're not trained in understanding what you see and how to work with and build a relationship and mitigate that, then the children get out of control. Now that's the average child of that age. That's understanding the developmental needs. If you were elementary, you have to have training on 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, which I would never want to teach. But because they come from a particular developmental place, the teacher has to be trained into how to work with that stage. That's true. Now we go to the high school, same thing. Now with all of that, you have the issues that come from the issues that the children and families deal with when you're talking about poverty. That may mean that you've got some children that are hungry, you've got some children that are starving for adult supervision, you have children that maybe don't have their dads, the mother's working 3 jobs, so you have all of those issues on top of that. You have to be trained on what to do with that. Now, in addition, your school has to be set up so that you have resources to mitigate some of the issues that the classroom teacher, through their training or just time, there's no way we can deal with that. At the last school where I was principal, we had in our school, we had a cooperative relationship with Gallagher Mental Health. I had children that had mental health issues. There's no way the teacher's going to be trained to deal with that, but I was able to get again, this is why I'm so much a community schools proponent. We were able to get a relationship with Gallagher Mental Health through community, and they set up a program in my school where the children would be in there at certain times of the day, and they would have counseling, and we even had music and art therapy for them.
And those are, Gallagher wasn't just volunteering that. That costs money, right?
That's exactly correct. That was a cooperative that we had money that was made available at that time. And of course, then after 2 years, lost the money.
Well, and that's one thing that I find interesting is when political spokespeople will say these teachers should voluntarily do, and I don't care if it's in the public school or in charter, that these teachers should take on an extra burden in their job to do something else. Now it's like learning how to properly use firearms, whatever it is. It's like, well, no, at the same time those people will be arguing marketplace theories, and those teachers are in there doing a job for X number of dollars. And if we have services that are being provided to the schools, those services cost money,
Yes.
and we need more of those services, and we need more personnel.
Exactly. Some of the staff that I've talked with from only a couple of the charter schools here in Marion County have talked about the fact that they have the extended day. See, these things aren't innovative. Extended day where they stay through 5:30. They say that, and that's based on the salary that they get. They don't get additional dollars for that. So what happens with some of those schools, you have high teacher turnover because they're completely exhausted. They have to come in on Saturdays and Sundays. That's true at Tinley, Charles Tinley. They come in on Saturdays and Sundays.
Didn't
They
you
get
say that
no
was the
extra
most
pay.
successful charter school?
Exactly, but what I'm saying
Okay.
is that you have high teacher turnover. That's why you need a long-term study that's going to come out with the Talent Alliance, as I said. High teacher turnover, because you're burning them out. There's no extra dollars. One of the things I've seen is where you have part-time teachers who are usually retired teachers that you pay to do your after-school and that do your Saturday programs. Again, you keep from burning out your teacher because you want teacher stability. Teacher stability is so important for low income and children of color. But I didn't finish when we're talking about discipline.
Mm-hmm.
The mode of discipline that has used for the most part in our country has been a punitive system, where the child acts up, you get this penalty, then you act up so many times, then you get suspended, then you act up so many times, then you get expelled. That's the punitive nature of discipline. A lot of that worked in the years past because we didn't care whether or not we lost a certain group of children because they were going to go off to the factory. They're going to drop out and go off to the factory. Now we're trying to educate all children, so we have to look at a different form of discipline, and that's the positive behavior support programs. There are programs like that nationally. The school systems are hard to adapt that. The NAACP's been trying to work with different school systems to get into that, but a lot of it costs money.
And that's a particular interest of mine, the issue of discipline, because I just see this so dominating
When I was the
K-12
dean of students for 10
education.
years.
However, I do have, and I watched a couple of videos from the School of Education at University of Indianapolis
Yes.
talking about discipline issues, and one of the videos showed a classroom of probably, they were 10th graders, I believe, and they were all writing on a project. They would have a
Yes.
project that they were writing on. And one student, she would not sit in her seat. She kept getting up and bothering other people. And the way that the instructor, the video instructed the teacher to handle the situation, or the school to handle the situation, is take the teacher and the student to a mediator, and the mediator decide how to handle that issue. And the solution was that she would agree to stay in her seat, but she could write on another topic. And to me, that's the worst thing to do. You put the teacher on the same level as the student, you make it sound like the teacher did something wrong, and you rewarded the student for bad behavior. And I'm concerned that some of the discipline issues where they get away from the old-fashioned discipline, which I
you
like.
always look at, how's it working for you? Are we saving more students? Are we continuing to have the same dropout? Do we still have a gap? So we have a dropout problem. We still have a gap. So you're looking at what will work to save the student. It's about what will work to save the student. I'm not going to comment on that because I don't know enough of the details.
I understand.
But what we can't go back because we had different mores. We had a different society. We had more two-parent families. We can't go back, but what we have to do is find out how can we save more children. So that's what it's about.
In the process of saving students and keeping disruptive students in the classroom, aren't you harming the other students?
If you can prove that, a lot of times the research shows you can't prove that. Putting more children out of school, and this is Russ Skiba's work down at the Equity Project in Bloomington. He and Daniel Lowson, a fellow out in Denver, Colorado, who's with the the Equity Policy Center. The data has shown that only thing you're doing is putting more kids out on the street to eventually be dropouts and going to the prison pipeline. Plus, they're disproportionate students of color and low income and special ed students. So there are more proactive and positive methods of working with those students. In fact, at Lawrence Township, we've had a great relationship with Lawrence and the superintendent about their high suspensions. So the superintendent's instituted some new programs. She has put in place what she calls intervention specialists in the school, so that when, like that girl, when there's a problem, the intervention specialist is called in to use intervention methods to work with that child and the family to get that child redirected, because you want to redirect and get them back in. Plus, you want to look at it from a child development point of view. What's going on? If you have a child continually misbehaving, you have to look at it from a behavioralist. What need are they trying to fulfill? See, a true educator never sees a child as bad. You see them as trying to fulfill a need. So what is it we need to do to get that need fulfilled? As you say, without destroying anything with the rest. And I was a dean of students and I was a teacher, and I can say I had a good handle on discipline because I came with it from a point of view, strict and firm, but also a behavioralist and understanding child development.
One of the schools that I substituted in was a Wayne Middle School. And other schools I've been to where you always have the disruptive students, but in the Wayne Middle School, they yanked them out of there. They didn't send them home, but they sent them to an in-school suspension. But they got those 5% of the students out of the classrooms that were taking up all my time trying to teach a class. And to me, that's the perspective I come from. And I realize you come from a different perspective.
And then you have to look at the data on those students and see, do they have in place a program? And I think Wayne does, because they've been through a lot of culturally responsive training to see what's happening to those students in the long run. The whole idea is to redirect them back.
Coming back to our topic, and I think that was very valuable, talking about discipline and everything. How many charter schools are there in the state of Indiana?
There are 70 operating right now.
And so there are 92 counties, so obviously we don't have a charter school in every county.
No.
Are people in a county that doesn't have a charter school, is a student there able to go to a charter school in a neighboring county?
It's wide open. As a matter of fact, I have to go, again, my short time with the IPCSA, I'm not all the way up with all the data yet, but I go back with, for instance, the options charter schools draw from 25 different school districts. Have a lot of IPS students, have a lot of students from Lawrence Central, from Pike. So yeah, there are more instances than people believe of people traveling to find the right school.
Do they have sports teams?
Some do, some don't.
I was just curious. I wasn't being
quite
facetious.
a few do. As a matter of fact, we had state championship basketball. I believe Indy Met won a couple of years ago in single A. And boy, I'm going to miss someone who's going to make them mad, hopefully. I apologize, but I think there was another that won a state championship at some level too. So.
Well, the General Assembly is coming to town here Monday, and you can see Carol's all thrilled about that. Maybe I should ask, what do you see happening, or what bills are going to be going through that might be of interest to the audience on education issues? Obviously, we have a new superintendent of public instruction, Galinda Ritz, who defeated Tony Bennett, who was more on the reform side. And what I saw, Mike Delph introduced a bill, for example, to allow school districts, something you maybe talked about, to go longer. Instead of having short days, go longer, maybe go 4 days a week, maybe go 3 days a week. And is it 190 days now?
180.
180 days. I know that some of the charter schools actually go longer than that, correct?
Some do, some don't.
Okay.
Wasn't there also a bill presented to require that the Lord's Prayer be recited every day?
Right.
That probably is not.
Of course, some of these will just be, what do they call them, vehicle bills?
Vehicle bill, yeah, vehicle bill. Well, vehicle bill is like an empty bill that they just file to have, because there's a filing date. They file an empty bill, then they fill it in later. It's a
Or
way of
this
getting
is to
around the
respond
rules.
to their constituents,
Right,
but
so-
these won't go anywhere.
So, but I realize it's very early. They just started putting the bills up.
Sure, and
Right.
I'm not the advocacy person for the IPCSA, but I, of course, am involved with that along the way. Yes, I mean, you will see our organization trying again to, protect the integrity of that charter school concept, and on both ends of it, the freedom for regulations. We don't want to have institutional creep come in and say, oh, charter schools have to do that too. That will destroy what's going on here. So that type of thing you will see. You will see a lot of groups, I think, band together to talk about alternative assessments, especially for alternative schools.
I
that's
believe
something
in
that
alternative
traditional
systems.
public schools and charter schools and should be doing together.
right.
You know, if we are creating schools, whether they are TPS or charter, that are, for instance, accepting students that are expelled and seeking them out and seeking out, you know, adults who have dropped out, then, you know, if we're saying that this school is about, you know, taking students who have already failed several times, the dropout rate, okay, and some of the other performance factors that are standard for the other schools, you know, just don't pertain. So I think you'll see some legislation to try to help with that, and so those kids aren't just left out. Because if all of a sudden that is automatically an F school, neither traditional public schools or charter schools will want those kind of schools to exist.
I know that Tony Bennett's grading system got a lot of support, but also got a lot of criticism, and I think they had some study committees over that. And one of the issues was like performance versus improvement or growth. Can you speak to that, what that issue was about?
Well, you know, it's always where the balance is. You know, to me as an educator, give me a kid and I want him to grow as much, him or her, to grow as much as he possibly can, okay? And if I have grown that person significantly, then that was a win, okay? And so the best way to look at growth is that you look at how well you do that with kids. If you have, simplify it, if you have 100 kids and 80 of them grow at a rate that exceeds the rate that you would expect by national norms, then you've done very, very well, despite the fact of where your school might be on a snapshot of where their test scores are. So it's a you know, what's more important, we were always you know, Tony Bennett deserves a lot of credit for recognizing the fact that, you know, a school snapshot, and this goes back to PL 221, which is before Tony Bennett even, but we've gone from a point where at one point we were at a school snapshot, how well does your school do with ISTEP, to a little bit of a growth factor, to more of a growth factor, but I would guess most people agree that we're not quite to the perfect model yet.
Right.
So the way I always explain it, say 65 is a passing grade, and say your students come in, they test a 20, and they move up to 60. If you don't look at the growth, you only look at performance, they're still a flunky. They're at 60, but they've tripled their scores.
Right.
And not all A through F systems measure the growth, and it depends on how much you measure growth versus
I think that's what the controversy is, as I've talked to people, it's how that's measured, and right now it's norm reference, and so there is some controversy about that. And I think with the new superintendent coming in, we'll see more discussion. I don't know what the legislation will look like, but we'll see more discussion on that.
Yeah, it'll be tweaked, and again, I don't want to underestimate or undervalue how important it was that, you know, we've moved to more of a growth model, but I think it needs to swing, you know, even further along the way,
and more, as you said, alternative assessments, performance-based assessments. We need to be wider with that.
An easy way to look at it, to help some people might be listening, let's say there is, whether it's a traditional public school or a charter school, let's say there's a late intervention high school model, okay? Right now the testing is their end of course assessment that's given in algebra and biology and in reading, and those students count the first time they take it, okay? And only if they've been in that school for 162 days.
Yeah.
So, you know, in schools, for instance, the one I was with before, Options Charter School, it's a late intervention high school. Had very few students in that circumstance, but should have some method to be evaluated rather than on the 4 or 5 students that, you know, took that test at that point.
Multiple count days? Are we going
Right
to that?
now, February, we're on the verge of the second one. So
Okay, so now there's a second count day. Well, and should
Well,
explain for
explain.
the audience what a count day is, if you would.
Okay, well, the count day has traditionally been called ADM for, is it average daily membership? Okay.
Yeah.
And it's the point where traditionally we've taken a snapshot of the school and how many students are there and attending, and that is your count, and that's how you're funded.
Right.
There has been one up until recently.
Just
There are now
recently.
two. And you may correct me on this, but, and I think there's some confusion on how the legislation was written last year. But we believe that the second one right now isn't going to be used to change the funding in July.
Not this year.
Not this
right.
year, but anticipate that that may be something that we see to get that, to the point where the second count day would impact the funding beginning July 1st. Right now, you take the count in September 14th this year, and it changed the funding, how many students are going to be funded starting January 1st, 2013. Okay? It will stay that way all the way through 2013. Now, if we have a change, there could be a second count day which changes it midway through the cycle. And, I think most educators in the charter school world are for that because, we want to show that we've maintained enrollment. And if we don't maintain enrollment, we can't say, let the funding follow the student. And then if the student leaves us, the funding should follow the student. That's fine.
In terms of, and we're getting towards wrap up here, do you see the number of charter schools in this state as increasing?
Well, it is increasing, and what we're hoping is that we can have some type of open dialogue. We appreciate this so much, I want to tell you that again, that we need more dialogue so we can talk about the accountability piece that is not where it needs to be right now, so that we can see, are we continuing to invest in something where we're not seeing the kind of value that we should see, or the traditional schools losing before we continue to add.
And those were two principles upon which charter schools, the theory arose in Massachusetts originally. I think it was an MIT prof who came up with the notion.
Minnesota.
Pardon?
Minnesota.
Actually,
the other end of the state.
No, it's actually MIT. It was a prof at MIT.
But then Minnesota did it.
Then Minnesota did
Okay.
it. Yeah, but
Gotcha.
there were two principles. One was freeing the schools of certain restrictions so that they could do things, and then second was accountability.
Absolutely.
And so we need to get both of those in there. But do you? And I know obviously the number is increasing, but do you see the number of charter schools increasing greatly in the next few years, or is there any way of gauging the increase per year, percentage-wise, of number of charter schools?
Well, there's no way of really predicting, but it's trending that the number.
I'm a Cubs
is
fan.
going
I know
up.
there's no way of predicting anything.
Yes, I would say you're going to see an influx of charter schools. You will also see probably some close down as the accountability measures, become more refined.
To date, since charter schools were brought in Indiana, how many charter schools have been shut down?
And here's where I wish I was the pro. I believe the number is 8.
And so we have
That's over 10% of 70, yeah.
The charter
Okay.
schools actually are going to be competing against private schools now for vouchers, as well as traditional public
Right.
schools, because the vouchers, and I realize we don't have enough time to get into a voucher, that's an entirely different show.
It is.
And the voucher was basically geared towards lower income individuals who didn't have, or had kids in public schools.
Well, wait, there are different arguments about vouchers. You're right, that's a completely different
Yeah.
show.
Because we're totally opposed to that.
Yeah, because that's just, you got First Amendment implications and everything there.
Yeah, we'll have to do a separate show about that.
Yeah, and then we'll yell and stuff. That'll be. We had mentioned before that we were going to talk about a couple of other topics, and said, once we wrapped up on, you guys can sit here and we'll just, Paul was wanting to bring up a couple of other topics, and right here at the end of the show.
Well, we were, in terms of education?
No, we were talking about just.
Well, we had some issues going on in locally here.
Yeah, on the blogs. Go ahead and fire one away.
Well, you took me off guard, Mark.
I usually do. It's easy.
Well, we obviously had the fiscal cliff. The Republicans went over the fiscal cliff.
No, the president choked.
The The president what?
Choked.
No, the president got everything he wanted.
No, he didn't. We had to take cuts, and we didn't get the tax increases that we wanted.
10-to-1 increases in taxes for budget cuts.
Paul, you're living in a world where...
That was the CBO study.
Well,
Congressional Budget Office.
well, it was, we were fortunate not to go over the fiscal cliff
Yeah.
because we would have had...
I see Carol pulling away. She's like, I want nothing to do
No,
with
no, no,
this.
yeah, no, you guys, they're innocent bystanders
Yes,
on this.
yes.
Paul and I are simply discussing this.
So we can actually let them leave.
Yeah, guys,
and
thank you very much
We
for
really
coming.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to
Thank
make
you.
one more
Appreciate it.
comment.
Sure.
When I talked about the resources, I forgot. Let's pull the resources toward early childhood.
Oh, the
And
early.
then that will definitely help our whole opportunity gap.
We should get contact information too from them.
Yeah, do you have websites?
The NAACP website is ndnaacp.org.
And for the Indiana Public Charter School Association, it's incharters.org.
And we would like to thank Carol Craig
Thank
and Kevin Davis for being here today. Thank you very much for being our guest.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
great.
Mark, we just got a few more minutes here as our guests leave. Couple I wanted to point out. Thank you, Carol. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Paul.
Some things on the blogs that are going on now. Indiana Law Blog is one I would highly recommend. They have, she puts up, Marcia Odie puts up a number of links to court filings, and one that I printed off this morning was briefs in the Berry versus Crawford legislative fines case that's going on before the Supreme Court. I thought that was interesting. Another individual's blog I would definitely recommend is Doug, I always mispronounce it.
It's Masson.
Masson, Doug Masson, www.masson.us//blog. And he is writing about a number of bills that are being introduced, and they're starting to come online now. And if you want to find those, you can go to www.in.gov/GA for General Assembly.
Or you can
follow the links.
Or you can make it really quick and just go to Ogden on Politics and ogdenonpolitics.com, because Paul has all the links on there.
Well, I don't have a link to the legislature.
No, but you've got the links to
Doug
Masson's blog.
Masson.
There was one on there, Matt Stone has been a guest of the show several times. Indy Student had an excellent blog today, or yesterday, it was yesterday, on Indianapolis streets, and the front page editorial that was written about Indianapolis public streets not being clear.
It was Matt Tully's column.
Yeah, but Matt Stone wrote his blog on it.
Yeah, exactly. He wrote about Matt Tully. Matt Stone, Indiana Daily student, Indiana Daily.
Just you go to Paul Ogden's web. Go to his
OgdenOnPolitics.com.
Ogden on Politics. You're going to be able to hit that on there.
But his point was, and Gary Welsh, Advance Indiana blog, I would highly recommend as well. Both wrote about it, and one of the points that they were making was Tully says, well, we just need to raise taxes.
No, the money's there.
The money's there, and as Matt said, we just need to stop giving it away to all these politically connected developers.
Another thing was that Gary Welsh wrote on Advance Indiana, he was indignant that Bobby Seale was going to speak at the Martin Luther King Day dinner for IUPUI,
Right.
and he got some things wrong about Bobby Seale. For one, Bobby Seale, he made it sound like Bobby Seale was disrupting the court during the Chicago 8 conspiracy trial. It was Chicago 8. He wasn't allowed to have his attorney present. And so every time his name was mentioned, he would object. So anyways, it's been a great show today. Thanks for joining us. All you out there on Indiana Talks, thanks for listening. We'll be on next week talking about the 10th Amendment. We have the director of the 10th Amendment Center in Florida is going to Skype in, and also we're going to have Karen Celestino-Horseman, former Democratic City County Council person, on here. Paul, this has been fun today. Thanks for our studio audience, and see you next week.
Thank you.